Well, thank you for joining me. We are at that time of the year when the holiday season is fast approaching. And I'm starting to get questions from across the country. Simon, what do we need to do this holiday season to stay safe and be prepared? Well, today I'm going to show a conversation with a good friend of mine, Wes Peterson, who is the Safety and Security Director of Eaglebrook Church here in Minnesota, one of the largest churches in the country. And I sat down and had a conversation with Wes about what does he do to protect his 10 campuses. What are some of those tips and tools that he could share with people that are asking themselves, how do we stay safe? So we're going to dive into that conversation in a few moments. But before it begins, I really want to say from the team at Kingswood and the Worship Security Academy, I'm blessed and honoured that you would allow us to come alongside your safety journey in 2021, and I look forward to working with many of you again in 2022. So let's dive into my conversation with Wes Peterson, the Safety and Security Director of Eaglebrook Church here in Minnesota, as he's sharing some tips and tools that you can implement today to help keep your church communities safe. Give us a little overview, Wes, about who you are and your sort of journey at Eaglebrook Church.
Yeah, you bet. As you said, I'm on staff here at Eaglebrook as the Safety and Security Director. I had a 25-year background in the corporate America world before I came into ministry. I've been on staff at Eaglebrook for 10 years, but I've actually been in a couple different roles here since I've been here. And in my volunteer life, I volunteer outside of the church as well, where I'm the chaplain for our local police and fire department. And because of that, and God's ways just kind of line things up in ways you don't even understand sometimes. When the safety and security director role was something that was put together here at Eaglebrook, my time as a chaplain really aligned me well with what we were trying to do here at the church for security. Not only because of that background, but also because I've been on staff at Eaglebrook and I understand and know our culture. So I have that ability that unique perspective, I guess, if you will, to weave security into who we are as a church. So it doesn't get intrusive, but it is still effective.
And tell us a little bit, Wes, because I know you've got a lot of depth responsibility. I don't know how you sleep at night sometimes, but maybe tell us about the sort of the size of Eaglebrook. I mean, I joked and said you're arguably one of the largest churches in the country. I believe that you are, but maybe tell people a little bit about the type of campuses that you oversee before we get into this conversation.
Yeah, you bet. We have, Eaglebrook is one church with multiple locations. So the look, the feel, the experience is all similar, if not the same, no matter what location you go to. The size of the buildings might be different. The layout of the buildings might be different. But our 10 campuses, we have the same type of focus on safety and security. Our ministries are pretty much the same in terms of what the weekend services look like, what special events we might do, all those types of things. My role is safety and security. So not only is it security related for church at Eaglebrook, but it's also safety in terms of staff safety, including things such as workers' comp and those types of things. But as a whole, from a security perspective, I think what security looks like here is just how do we do church in a way where our mission stays the mission, where we can have an effective security program in place without distracting from what we're trying to do. You'll notice if you ever walk into an Eaglebrook, we jokingly call Eaglebrook the largest church that nobody's ever heard of, because we're not out there in the spotlight with, all these different things that some of these other larger churches might get involved in. We do that intentionally. Not that those are bad things. We just choose not to do that. But you'll notice that our security teams aren't wearing security T-shirts. They're not, people in the lobby acting like security guards. They're just natural people blending into the woodwork and being a part of the scenery.
And it's great. It would be really good for people to hear a little bit about your background and Eaglebrook. And I should say that, me and you have been friends for many years. And interestingly, you were going to come to one of my events, and for whatever reason, you stood me up. And then I saw your name and I was thinking, I need to reach out to this guy. And then instantly we sort of hit it off and became friends. And what I love about your church and your program is the culture that you have. You built this strong culture around security, and also, believing that security is ministry. The heart of a church is important and is involved in everything that you do there. So like I said, I can't think of a better conversation or a better person to have this conversation with, just to give some basic tips and tools about the holiday season. So as we look at Christmas being a religious festival, it also brings a lot of risk to our house of worship, Wes. And I know there's four things that you're going to sort of talk about today, just that you sort of reflect on at Eaglebrook every year, which would be to the benefit of people listening to this podcast. So maybe let's start off with the first thing that you consider as you approach the holiday season, Wes.
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing is to be proactive and talk to your staff about what to expect during the holiday season. And the reason I say that is, as a church, there's a good and a bad to what we do, right? The good is we attract broken people and we provide healing or hope for them. The bad is we attract broken people, and sometimes broken people come with issues that we don't necessarily have the skills or the ability to manage the way they need to be managed. So talk to your staff and just help them understand how to be prepared, what to expect for the weekend. It's going to bring more people into the doors, people that you may not ever see outside of Christmas season, or Easter for that matter, as we go into that season as well. But there's going to be more people coming in. So how do you prepare your staff to be vigilant, to be aware? And that's another factor we'll talk to in about in a minute here, but just really prepping your staff to be aware. In the church world, sometimes it becomes um, blurred, if you will, in those lines between ministry and security, where we want to help people, we want to love, we want to minister to people, we want to provide that hope or that opportunity for them to establish a relationship with Jesus Christ. But in that effort, sometimes we overlook things that could be concerns out of our desire to love and care for people. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but we should be vigilant to those things and aware of those things we might need to be exercising a little bit more caution around.
And when I'm thinking of, and that's a great way to start actually, Wes, as well as talk about preparing staff. And when I'm thinking of that in my mind, this is something that doesn't cost anything. It could be an email or a notification in a meeting. Is most probably best as obviously you're a large church, 10 campuses, but it's mostly best as a face-to-face conversation. Just say, hey, someone who's in charge of children's ministry, just reminding you that the holidays are coming up. This is what it can mean. There could be fathers that have got non-contact orders. It could be it's an ideal time for them to try and come to church and see their son or daughter when they're not allowed to. I mean, is there any best practices you could give about what those conversations look like? Like I said, my mind drifted towards it's mostly best in person, but I guess an email or team meeting would suffice. But if you can make a round robin to those different teams, that might be the best way. But what would you say, Wes, from your experience?
Yeah, I think an in-person conversation is always the best because then there can be conversation. And you can have those people who might have doubts or fears or concerns about what this looks like, and you can have that conversation. Sometimes that's not possible. So, I think an email is probably, well, let's all admit it, we have a lot of emails. We don't always read everything that comes through. But if you put a short 2-minute video in place of an in-person meeting, that might be the second best way. And then third is an email, obviously, would be a way to communicate this. But I think it's important, too, that when you're communicating this, be careful how you're communicating it. We live in a security world where we sometimes look at the things or the risks that are potential risks that our lives kind of get caught up in. As security people, we get caught up in the worst case scenarios we should prepare for. So when you're communicating it, don't do it in a way that's going to put the fear into people that they don't want to even come to church that day to work. But talk about those potential things and how we can use good wisdom when it comes to preparing ourselves to keep the people who come into our church, whether it's staff, volunteers, or attenders, and give them a safe place to worship and establish a relationship with Christ.
Yeah, that's a great point because it is very easy. I mean, it's okay for me as a consultant or someone who works for churches to come in and quite often they need me to come in and scare and say this is a reality. But we've got to remember when we're talking about staff and volunteers, this isn't a primary function, is just to alert them to what can happen in the world. And we're having some forethought. We're doing some pre-planning to make sure, if harm does come inside our building, we're ready for it. I like it. So that's number one, is preparing staff through a series of sort of meetings or informal conversations about risks that can happen during the holiday season. What's your number two? What's the second thing that you'd advise people to look at?
Well, if you don't have a security team, I would suggest that maybe you look into establishing a couple individuals who could be there per service. Whether they don't have to be law enforcement backgrounds. I would just be very cautious that you're putting the right people in these roles. do sit down in interviews with them, make sure they're mentally and emotionally stable people, and help them understand that this is not a hero thing. This is more of a observation and reporting type of a thing. But have them in place. And if you don't have that or the ability to do that, work with your staff or your leadership at your campus or your church to work with your volunteers. You kind of have a natural security team in place, although you don't want your greeters and parking lot volunteers to be security people. They have eyes, they have ears, they see things. And if they see something that doesn't feel right, encourage them and give them the proper way to report that to you. It kind of leads to a see something, say something type of a thought process. Encourage your folks to, if something doesn't look right, tell somebody about it. The challenge with that is that always has to be reminded that this should always be about the behavior and never about the individual. Just because somebody doesn't look like they fit in doesn't mean they don't belong there. Their behavior is the indicator we should be watching for to make sure that that behavior is what we're keen on.
Yeah, and I like on your number 2 there, and I wasn't too sure if 2 and 3 merged into 1 there. Wes, we can come back to that, yeah, for sure, because I'm a trained investigator, so I'm going to probe you here. But I like what you said about, if you don't have a team, just find a couple of people, because what I'm hearing from what you're saying is find a proactive response to an emergency situation. And most often, particularly talking about the holiday season, around Christmas being the largest religious festival that we really have, when people that don't often come to church will come. I think my pastor calls them Creasters, Christmas and Easter.
Right.
So that's generally a real place of large gatherings. Think about if someone trips over and twists their ankle, how are we going to respond? If we need to evacuate a building, how are we going to respond? If someone faints, how are we going to respond? So the message I'm getting from you is think about having some type of pre-planned response, and if you don't have a team, who are those individuals that can sort of perform that role for you? And again, I'm sure you'd advocate for training and just making sure they're the right type of people, as you said. So what about if the church does have a team then? So like you, you've got a large team. Maybe it's a good time to tell us a little bit about the Eaglebrook way with your safety team. Across 10 campuses, you most probably haven't got 5 or 6 people, right? Tell us a little bit about the makeup of your team.
Well, a couple of things. Number one is whether you have a team or not, don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple, and prepare them. Like you said, have an emergency preparedness plan and train them on this and help them understand what those steps are should we see something. You don't have to have expensive equipment like radios and headsets and all these different things. They come in very handy if you have them. They're great, use them. But it could be a simple conversation that you have with people about how to communicate if you see something that doesn't fit in. At Eaglebrook, our approach has been to have 3 different roles, basically. One of them is a medical volunteer role, and that role, they're there attending church like they normally do. We just ask them if there's ever a medical emergency on site, jump to the aid of that individual until first responders can show up. And that's more of a safety side of things. On the security side, we have 2 roles. And one of them is an armed role, and one of them is an unarmed role. And I know some people get really nervous about that armed role, the guns in church conversation. We wanted to be very careful with this. To have people in your church with guns is a controversial topic. Our approach was we wanted to make sure those people are trained well beyond anything we could ever possibly train them on. So we've made a decision that those armed people are police officers, people who are either active or retired law enforcement, and they have training well beyond anything we could ever provide. There are defensive response people. God forbid anything should ever happen, they're there to help. And it doesn't take an army. It just takes one person to distract somebody from their mission of trying to do bad things. But that person or people are there to be a defensive mechanism should anything bad happen. They also have very highly trained de-escalation skills. So if they have to interact with somebody in the worship center or the sanctuary, they can do that in ways where we probably aren't, as pastors or staff at a church, as skilled at doing. Our unarmed role, they are more observation and reporting. They are in the lobby, in the common spaces, walking throughout the various parts of the building, just kind of keeping an eye on things. They're not, like I said earlier, they're not wearing security t-shirts. They don't stand out at all. And that's intentional because we don't want somebody who has bad thoughts to be able to key on who those people are they need to look for. But their job is just to pay attention and share concerns with others, whether it be via radio, or in-person conversation about things that don't feel right.
I like it. And just a running theme there of having a pre-prepared plan, thinking, as my good friend Tina Rose says, what can go wrong, writing down that list and thinking we become a place of even larger mass gathering around the holiday season. How are we going to respond? And as you said, if you don't have a team, find the one or two individuals that have got common sense, that have the aptitude for this type of work, and ask them to step into the role. And if you've got that team in place, is provide them some extra sort of training and let them know what your expectation is. Okay, so good. So you were starting to morph into a third one in there. I heard about the see something, say something, but I'm going to bring you back because you said something which is really crucial in a church, and you can tell we're friends because you're speaking like me and I'm speaking like you. But you mentioned about we focus on the behaviors, not who the person is or what they looks like. So your third point is around, reporting, I'm sure, observations and reporting. But do you mind telling us a little bit about what you would advocate on around the behaviors? Because that's a key point when, particularly if churches have safety teams, sometimes people become so focused around, and I went to a church only 2 weeks ago, and everyone was super focused on, well, what if someone brings a backpack in? I said, well, is the backpack the concern or is it the person? So maybe tell us your philosophy on why behavior is so important, not so much about the ethnicity or what the person looks like.
Right. And who are we to define what normal looks like of somebody who should come to a church, right? I mean, there are all kinds of people walking through those doors. Even those who have big problems in their lives, it's probably the absolute best place where they could be that day. So let's welcome them. Let's help them find their way to where they need to get to. And as far as backpacks go and those different behavioral type things, it's still beyond me why you have to pack every belonging of your life into a backpack and bring it into church. Like, I guess we live in a culture that leaving them in your car could be a risk of car theft as well, but that still happens. We don't have a policy that says you can't bring them in, but we should pay attention to those things. If that individual comes in with a backpack and they set it down someplace and walk away from it, that should be a point of concern. We should communicate that urgently, but sensitively. And just watch these kind of things. If somebody comes in on a day where it's warm outside and they're wearing a trench coat, that's a key. Let's pay attention to that. If they seem to have their hands in their pockets and are acting very nervous, let's pay attention to that. People who are in the church but go out to their car and come back in multiple times, that's an indication that there's something that we should be paying attention to. If you have on-site police officers, let them know what you're looking at so that they can help keep an eye on and be prepared. If you don't, let your security teams know and have somebody who's prepared to call 911 should it get to that point.
And again, during the holiday season, we have either hundreds of people coming into a house of worship, or large churches like you've got thousands upon thousands of people coming in. Around the sort of see something, say something, and the behaviors, what would you tell if there's a volunteer leader listening to this? Or if there's a staff employee listening to this, or just someone that is in a small church and they're the eyes and ears of a church, how do they spread that message around the holiday season? Wes, what would you sort of tell them is best practice to try and get that wider than their circuit of influence, so everyone is out looking for these behaviors?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think if you're intentional about this, you can get ahead of this before the services start for your Christmas holiday, and just have your church leaders or your ministry leaders proactively huddle with your volunteers before they start in their role and just say, hey, we're not asking you to be security. We're not afraid of anything happening. We don't have any indications, or maybe you do. Be diligent or be sensitive to how you share those things that you might be concerned about, but be upfront and proactive with this and let them know that, hey, as church volunteers, we want this to be a great experience for people. We want them to come through our doors. We want them to hear a great message. We want them to go home inspired and filled with hope. But if you happen to see something that doesn't feel right, don't just stuff it down and think, it's probably nothing, or I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, so I'm not going to say anything. Discreetly go tell somebody about it. Don't yell across the hall, or the room, this person looks strange or I'm concerned about them. Just have a discreet conversation with somebody immediately and let them know what you're concerned about and why. And then between you and those individuals, you can determine an action plan.
Yeah, and it's what you said on your first one, I guess, really about sort of preparing staff is getting out there, no matter if you're an employee or a volunteer, is getting out to the different staff meetings, meeting people, getting ahead of the game, and just saying, "Hey, here's one or two things that I need you to be thinking about as we get up to the holiday season for these reasons." So I like it. Now you tried to morph two and three together, and I wasn't going to let you do that, Wes. And I know you've got a fourth one about sort of open doors and sort of protecting the perimeter of your church. So tell us what your fourth sort of tip and tool is for holiday season security.
Yeah, in general, I mean, there's this conversation that I'm sure we've all heard about and talked about called the open door church. Can an open door church have closed doors? And I'm of the opinion that the answer is absolutely yes. You can still be an open door church where you're welcoming of people without putting yourself or others at risk. As an example, when we're not doing ministry, our church building doors are locked. We do have a sign outside that says if you need to talk to a pastor, call this number and somebody will come meet you. So we do have alternative ways to get a hold of people in place. Just leaving the doors wide open, even if there's somebody there watching the doors. In this day and age, you never know who's going to walk through and what kind of risks you're putting people at. So we keep those doors locked outside of ministry events. Um, Weekend services, student ministry services, whatever, youth ministries, whatever those things look like, the doors are open. They're not locked then, but we have other security teams or on-site police officers or other resources in place to kind of help us with that security aspect. But recently, we as a church, we kind of came across a situation that made us adjust even more, and it had nothing to do with us. It just happened to happen on our property. We had a smaller event. It was a small group leader event that was taking place at one of our locations. And unbeknownst to us, earlier in the day, one of our local law enforcement agencies was dealing with an individual who was suicidal. And they resolved that, or they thought they did, and this individual was taken care of. But later that night, at about 7 o'clock at night, I received a phone call from our local police department asking if we could get access to our parking lot cameras because they had a report of shots fired. Well, what it turned out to be is an individual came into our parking lot, unrelated to anything we were doing, and a person from across the street who was a guest at a neighbor's house saw this individual loading a shotgun and then proceeded to shoot that shotgun. That person called 911. The guy with the gun took off and went down the road. And fast forwarding a little bit, it resulted in a pursuit that ended up with this gentleman barricading himself in his home, where he later started to shoot at the neighbors and at the police officers. And they had a response where, thankfully, he's still alive, but he was shot and taken to the hospital. But like I said, he's still alive today. Later that night, I spoke with our local law enforcement. I said, "Hey, what do you think would have happened had you have shown up while this individual that was shooting was still in our parking lot?" And they kind of hesitated a little bit, and they said, "Well, to be honest with you, I think given this person's state of mind, they were mentally unhealthy, they were already suicidal, and they were heavily intoxicated. There's no doubt that they would have tried to barricade themselves in the nearest building, which was our church." I saw there was a lot of cars out there. What's going on? And I said, "Well, we're having a small group leader meeting, and our front doors of our building were wide open. There was nobody in the lobby monitoring the doors, and all the people in this meeting were in a different room. This person would have came into our building with no deterrent and barricaded himself inside of our building," is what the speculation was. Obviously, that sent chills up and down our spine, and we, even though it wasn't related to us, it was a near miss that happens. You just never know what's going to unfold around us. So we made the decision that going forward for these different events, for those people who are invited to them, we're going to send an email out in advance saying that the event starts at this time. The doors will open at this time. For your security, for your safety, we're going to relock the doors 15, 20 minutes later. But during that time, we're going to have somebody monitoring these doors at all times as well. And if there's a latecomer, we'll have somebody there that can let them in, or if somebody has to go to their car and come back, there'll be somebody to let them back in as well. But it's a change we made because of a situation that had nothing to do with us, but it made us realize that it doesn't have to do with us, but it can still happen to us. So we wanted to make sure we made an adjustment to that. Our leadership team fully embraced it. We're putting those steps into place as we speak today to mitigate that risk.
Yeah, and it's one thing that I always talk about and advocate is to, sometimes the first question I'll ask churches is, what does open door mean to you?
Yeah.
And I just pause and I wait and listen, because with people, and we want to be an open door church because we invite people into our communities, believing that there's no sin that our Lord cannot forgive, but we're also opening our doors to a lot of hurt and a lot of pain, and a lot of criminal acts, as you just described with this gentleman. So as we move into the holiday season, we do have to consider, if we've got 2 or 3 entrances to our church, do they all need to be open? If we've got 10, do they need to be open? How can we redirect that foot traffic past a person who's at reception or past a volunteer, so they can do the ministry of the church? They can reach out their hand, say, welcome to Eaglebrook Church, what brings you here today, and enter into a conversation. If you have too many doors open, you don't have volunteers at each entrance, it's actually not a very community or very open, engaging. You want to try and meet it to see the people as they're approaching. So it's a big lesson there, but it is a mindset as to what does open door church mean, and seeing and hearing the type of incident happen to you, Wes, and that you're going to change your policy surrounding, the sort of tone of church open doors. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm just going to recap. I'm going to see if I've got these right now, because I was trying to write them down as you were talking. But just to remind people, Wes's 4 points and tips were: prepare your staff and volunteers around safety and security training. Was, if you don't have a safety team, identify a couple of people that can act as that role for you. If something does go wrong, if someone falls down, there's a medical emergency, there's something more serious, who is the person who is going to respond to that incident for you? If you do have a safety team, it's a good time to refresh the training and skills that they have. The third one was around see something, say something. We are remaining focused on the behaviors of the person, not the ethnicity. It doesn't matter the color of their skin. We're always focused on the behaviors. That's how we do everything from a Christ-like mindset. And then the fourth one that Wes gave was around open doors, understanding what does that really mean for us in a church? Do we need to have all our doors open? Do we have volunteers at those doors to greet people, to keep that community spirit? So, Wes, I was writing this down as you were talking. Did I do okay on your 4 holiday season tips?
You did a great job. You must have done much better in high school than I did.
Well, it's my police investigation days. That's it. Is writing my notes down. But hey, I mean, just before we wrap up, is there any other sort of words of wisdom you'd want to share with a volunteer, safety leader, a church employee, as they come towards a holiday season and they're thinking, what do I need to be doing? What do I do next? Any sort of closing remarks or comments you'd like to make to that person?
Well, yeah, I think the heart of everything, what we do as a church, is to be a church, and the church is about the people. So let's be focused on that and being there for people. Our security team is a ministry. It's not a tactical thing, although we have tactical type approaches. We're still focused on ministry. So as people come through your doors for the very first time, they might be return visitors next week. These holidays bring people in, and we can raise the water level in terms of what our weekly attendance looks like. So let's be ready to welcome them, greet them. But in the meantime, let's be attentive, pay attention, love on people, and then act on the things we need to act on. And enjoy the holiday season.
Well, Wes, as always, it's been an honor and a privilege to talk to you. And I wish you and your community a safe holiday season. And no doubt I'll talk to you soon. So you take care. Thank you for joining me.
You bet, Simon. Thank you.